Some people spend an entire lifetime waiting for someone to truly see them. Others stop waiting long before life gives them a reason to hope. On one cold autumn evening, beneath the glowing lights of the wealthiest district in the city, a young woman stood, completely unnoticed while hundreds of expensive cars rolled past without slowing down. Rain soaked through the sleeves of her faded cardigan, and the grocery bag clutched against her chest was beginning to tear apart. Nobody looked twice. Not the businessmen rushing into luxury hotels. Not the elegantly dressed couples laughing beneath designer umbrellas. Not even the security guards standing outside the towering mansion across the street. To everyone around her, she was invisible. Yet within the next few minutes, the most feared man in the city would stop everything because of her. A man whose name made politicians whisper. A man whose enemies vanished without warning. A man who trusted almost no one would find himself unable to stop thinking about the girl everyone else ignored. But the reason had nothing to do with beauty. It had nothing to do with destiny. And it certainly wasn't love at first sight. It began with a simple act of kindness. An act so ordinary that nobody else even noticed it. Yet it would quietly change two lives forever. Before discovering how that impossible story unfolded, there was something the world never knew about the girl standing alone in the rain. Because people often judged her by the clothes she wore. But almost nobody understood the weight she carried every single day. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 23 years old. Every morning began before sunrise. An old alarm clock buzzed at 5:30. Inside a tiny apartment, where peeling wallpaper and cracked windows reminded every tenant that dreams were considered a luxury. Emily rarely complained. There was no point. Complaints never paid rent. They never filled empty refrigerators. They never made life easier. Instead, she simply got up, folded the blanket she used instead of a proper comforter, tied back her chestnut brown hair, and quietly prepared for another day that looked almost exactly like the one before. The apartment belonged to her elderly grandmother, Margaret. Age had stolen most of Margaret's strength, but never her kindness. Even on difficult mornings, she insisted on making tea before Emily left for work. One day, Margaret often whispered with a warm smile, "Someone will notice the heart hidden behind those tired eyes." Emily always smiled back, not because she believed those words, but because she couldn't bear to disappoint the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise her. Emily's parents had died in a highway accident when she was only 8 years old. The tragedy left behind more questions than answers. Insurance covered almost nothing. Relatives slowly disappeared. Friends stopped visiting. Eventually, only Margaret remained. She worked 2 jobs well into her 70s just to keep food on the table and a roof overhead. Watching those sacrifices shaped Emily's entire life. She grew up believing that love wasn't measured by grand speeches. Love was waking up early so someone else could sleep. Love was pretending not to be hungry so another person could eat. Love was giving everything without asking for recognition. Perhaps that was why Emily became the kind of person who quietly helped everyone around her. She volunteered at neighborhood food drives whenever time allowed. She carried groceries for elderly neighbors. She comforted frightened children waiting alone at bus stops. She remembered birthdays that everyone else forgot. Ironically, nobody ever remembered hers. Life had taught Emily something painful. The people who gave the most often received the least. Still, she refused to let bitterness replace compassion. That decision became the strongest part of her character. After leaving home each morning, Emily boarded the same crowded city bus toward one of the most luxurious neighborhoods in the state. The contrast never stopped feeling surreal. Within 40 minutes, broken sidewalks transformed into polished marble entrances. Old apartment buildings gave way to glass skyscrapers. Luxury boutiques displayed handbags that cost more than her yearly salary. It felt like traveling between 2 completely different worlds. Emily worked as a maid inside Blackwood Manor. The mansion belonged to one of the city's wealthiest families. Everything inside sparkled. Crystal chandeliers reflected morning sunlight across polished floors. Fresh flowers arrived daily. Paintings worth millions decorated endless hallways. The dining room alone was larger than Emily's apartment building. Yet despite all that beauty, very little warmth existed inside those walls. Employees came and went like ghosts. Housekeepers were expected to remain silent. Eye contact with guests was discouraged. Invisible workers created visible perfection. Emily understood the rules. She polished silver, changed linens, prepared guest rooms, watered gardens, organized libraries. Sometimes she spent hours cleaning spaces nobody entered for weeks. Her work was flawless, rarely acknowledged, occasionally criticized, never celebrated. The other staff members often wondered why she continued smiling. One afternoon, another maid named Rachel shook her head while watching Emily help an elderly gardener gather fallen branches after an unexpected storm. "You'll wear yourself out helping everyone," Rachel sighed. Emily simply smiled. "Maybe," she replied softly. "But everyone deserves at least one person willing to help." Rachel stared at her for several seconds, then quietly returned to work. Those words stayed with her longer than expected. Emily possessed an unusual ability. She noticed people nobody else seemed to see. The lonely chef silently eating dinner after everyone left. The exhausted chauffeur rubbing aching hands between shifts. The elderly gardener whose birthday passed without anyone remembering. The nervous new employee terrified of making mistakes. She never solved every problem. Sometimes all she offered was a kind word. Sometimes just a smile. Surprisingly, that was often enough. What Emily didn't realize was that life has a mysterious way of rewarding quiet goodness. Not immediately, not obviously, but eventually, far beyond the walls of Blackwood Manor. Another world operated under completely different rules. It was a world where loyalty outweighed law, where whispered conversations carried more power than public speeches, where fortunes were built in silence and destroyed overnight. At the center of that world stood one man, Adrian Moretti, 38 years old, feared by rivals, respected by allies, studied by law enforcement, misunderstood by almost everyone. Newspapers called him ruthless. Television commentators called him untouchable. Business magazines described him as an international investor. The truth existed somewhere between those carefully crafted stories. Very few people had ever looked directly into Adrian's gray eyes without immediately lowering their own. His reputation reached every corner of the city. Yet the man behind the legend remained almost entirely unknown. He trusted almost no one. He spoke only when necessary. His decisions reshaped lives with a single sentence. People obeyed him out of fear, not affection, not admiration, certainly not love. Unknown to Emily, fate was already moving invisible pieces into place. Neither of them had any reason to believe their worlds would ever collide. One belonged to forgotten hallways and endless responsibilities. The other ruled over empires built on influence and danger. Their lives should never have crossed. But destiny rarely asks permission. Sometimes it arrives disguised as coincidence. Sometimes it hides inside the smallest choices. And sometimes it begins with someone stopping to help a stranger while everyone else keeps walking. The following evening, after another exhausting shift, Emily left the mansion carrying a small paper bag containing leftover bread the kitchen staff had insisted she take home. The sky had turned gray. Rain began falling without warning. Most pedestrians hurried toward shelter. Emily noticed an elderly street musician struggling to gather scattered sheet music before the rain ruined it. Without hesitation, she knelt beside him. She didn't think about getting wet. She didn't worry about missing the next bus. She simply helped. Cars splashed through puddles nearby. Luxury vehicles rolled past without slowing. No one paid attention. No one except the man sitting silently inside a black armored sedan that had just stopped at the traffic light. Across the street, from behind the tinted window, Adrian Moretti watched. The young woman carefully collecting rain-soaked pages for a man everyone else ignored. Something about the scene felt strangely unfamiliar. Not because helping someone was extraordinary, but because genuine kindness, without expectation, had become painfully rare in his world. The traffic light turned green. His convoy began moving. Yet Adrian's eyes remained fixed on the young woman until the rain slowly hid her from view. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she lived. He didn't know why he couldn't stop thinking about what he had just witnessed. All he knew was this. For the first time in many years, someone had managed to capture the attention of the most powerful man in the city, without even realizing he was there. And before another sunrise arrived, fate would arrange a meeting neither of them could have imagined. The following morning arrived like every other morning in Emily Carter's life. Before dawn, the tiny apartment was already awake. The kettle whistled softly as Margaret prepared 2 cups of tea. The old woman smiled despite the stiffness in her hands, pretending not to notice the growing worry behind Emily's eyes. Money had become tighter than ever. The landlord had extended his patience once already. Medical bills continued to pile up on the small kitchen table. Emily quietly folded the notices and tucked them into a drawer. Before her grandmother could see them, there was no reason for Margaret to carry another burden. She had carried enough for a lifetime. Outside, the city slowly came alive. Luxury cars filled the avenues while delivery trucks disappeared into narrow streets. Every person seemed to be rushing toward a destination. Emily joined the familiar morning crowd, unaware that someone else had already begun searching for her. Across the city, inside the top floor of Moretti International Holdings, Adrian Moretti stood before floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. From that height, the city appeared calm, beautiful, orderly. Only Adrian knew how much chaos existed beneath those shining rooftops. His chief of security, Marco Rossi, stepped quietly into the office. "There was an unusual request this morning," Marco said. Adrian never turned around. "What request?" The surveillance team was surprised. Silence filled the room. "You asked them to identify a young woman seen yesterday." Adrian remained still. "I did." Marco waited. No explanation followed. That alone was unusual. Adrian never investigated strangers out of curiosity. Every person his organization watched represented either a threat or an opportunity. This girl fit neither description. The team located her. Marco finally continued. "Emily Carter, 23 years old, housekeeper at Blackwood Manor. No criminal record. No unusual connections. She lives with her grandmother in a modest apartment." Another pause. "That is all." Adrian slowly nodded. Nothing about the report explained why. The image of the rain-soaked young woman refused to leave his thoughts. There had been no performance. Guests watched in uncomfortable silence. "You've embarrassed this household in front of everyone." The waiter lowered his head. Emily saw tears beginning to form. Without thinking, she stepped forward. It wasn't entirely his fault. The room became even quieter. The owner slowly turned. "Excuse me." Emily kept her voice gentle. The floor near the entrance became slippery after guests came in from the rain. She looked toward the frightened waiter. He tried to save the tray. Several employees stared at Emily in disbelief. Nobody interrupted wealthy employers. Nobody risked their own position for another worker, especially during an event like this. The owner frowned. "So now the housekeeper wishes to explain my own mansion to me?" Emily bowed her head respectfully. "No, sir." Another silence, long enough to become uncomfortable. Then a calm voice broke through the tension. "She's correct." Every head turned. Adrian Moretti had spoken. He walked toward the broken glass without any sign of irritation. His eyes briefly examined the polished marble. "The floor is wet." He looked directly at the owner. Anyone could have slipped. The owner immediately changed his expression. "Of course." He forced a smile. "It appears the matter has been misunderstood." The young waiter stared in disbelief. Within seconds, the situation that had seemed hopeless completely changed. Emily looked toward Adrian. For the first time, their eyes truly met. She expected arrogance. She expected coldness. Instead, she saw something unexpected. Weariness. Not physical exhaustion. A deeper kind of loneliness hidden beneath absolute control. Before she could fully understand why that expression affected her, Adrian gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement. Then he simply walked away. No dramatic gesture. No attempt to continue the conversation. Nothing more. Yet Emily couldn't explain why that brief exchange lingered in her thoughts for the rest of the evening. Later that night, after the gala ended, staff members gathered in the service hallway. The rescued waiter approached Emily. His hands still trembled. "You saved my job." Emily smiled. "No." She gently shook her head. "We both know someone else did." The waiter glanced toward the ballroom. "Why would a man like Adrian Moretti defend people like us?" Emily looked down for a moment. "I don't know." She truly didn't. Neither did Adrian. As his convoy drove through the quiet city streets, he replayed the evening in his mind. Not the speeches. Not the business negotiations. Not the influential guests. Only one moment remained perfectly clear. The young housekeeper had willingly risked her own future to protect someone who had nothing to offer in return. Twice in 2 days. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Most people revealed their true character when they believed nobody Important was watching. Emily had unknowingly revealed hers. And somehow, that mattered. Back inside her apartment, Emily sat beside her grandmother's bed after helping her fall asleep. The unpaid medical bills remained hidden inside the drawer. The future still looked uncertain. Nothing about her life had changed. Or so she believed. Miles away, Adrian Moretti made a decision that surprised even himself. He looked toward Marco. I want to know something. Marco waited. What kind of person keeps choosing strangers over herself? Marco blinked. The question sounded less like an order, and more like genuine curiosity. Neither man realized that the answer would change far more than either of them expected. Because the next time Emily Carter and Adrian Moretti met, it would no longer be by chance. And one unexpected conversation would begin, unraveling the walls both of them had spent years building around their hearts. The city awakened beneath a blanket of silver clouds. For Emily Carter, it was simply another morning filled with responsibilities. For Adrian Moretti, it was the first morning in years that business reports failed to hold his attention. Documents covering international investments lay untouched across his enormous desk. Financial projections worth hundreds of millions of dollars waited for his approval. Marco Rossi quietly entered the office carrying another folder. The board meeting begins in 15 minutes. Adrian barely looked away from the window. Reschedule it. Marco hesitated. All of it. All of it. The bodyguard had worked beside Adrian for nearly 12 years. During that time, meetings had been canceled only for emergencies. Today there was no emergency, only an unusual silence surrounding the man who rarely allowed emotions to interfere with decisions. After several moments, Adrian spoke again. What is Blackwood Manor hosting this afternoon? Marco opened another folder. A children's charity luncheon. Local orphanages are attending. Most of the household staff will be working the event. Adrian slowly nodded. Prepare the car. Marco understood better than to ask why. Emily spent the morning arranging flowers throughout the mansion's ballroom. Bright ribbons decorated the walls. Children's artwork replaced expensive paintings for the afternoon celebration. For once, the enormous mansion felt alive, with genuine laughter instead of formal conversations. That alone made Emily smile. She had always believed children possessed a remarkable ability. They saw hearts before status. Several buses soon arrived carrying dozens of excited boys and girls from nearby orphanages. Emily helped welcome them inside. Some stared in amazement at the crystal chandeliers. Others ran toward tables filled with colorful desserts. One little girl, no older than 6, remained quietly near the entrance clutching an old stuffed rabbit. She looked frightened. Emily slowly knelt beside her. First time somewhere this big. The little girl nodded without speaking. It feels scary. Emily smiled gently. It felt scary for everyone the first time. She pointed toward another child laughing while trying to catch floating balloons. Want to see something? The little girl looked up. Emily quietly took one balloon and tied it around the rabbit's tiny arm. There. The child stared for several seconds. Then, for the first time that day, she smiled. A real smile. One that reached her eyes. Emily smiled back. Sometimes happiness required nothing more than a balloon. Several black luxury vehicles rolled into the circular driveway. Security personnel immediately became alert. Adrian Moretti stepped from the lead sedan. Unlike the previous evening, today's visit was unofficial. No business partners accompanied him. No reporters followed. Only Marco remained nearby. As Adrian entered the ballroom, cheerful laughter echoed through the mansion. Children raced between decorated tables. Volunteers served lunch. Music floated softly through the air. It was a world completely different from the one Adrian usually occupied. Then he saw her. Emily wasn't serving influential guests. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by children, helping them assemble paper flowers from brightly colored sheets. One little boy accidentally tore his paper. His shoulders immediately dropped. I'm no good at this. Emily shook her head. You just made a different flower. But it's broken. She smiled. No. She carefully folded the torn edges. It simply became something new. Within moments, the ruined paper had transformed into a colorful butterfly. The boy's eyes widened. I made that. Emily laughed softly. You certainly did. Nearby volunteers smiled as well. Nobody noticed Adrian watching quietly from across the room. Nobody except Marco. Boss. Adrian never answered. For several moments, he simply observed. Power had introduced him to presidents, royal families, billionaires, military leaders. Yet somehow this ordinary young woman possessed something almost none of them did. The ability to make another person feel valuable, without asking for anything in return. Later that afternoon, heavy rain unexpectedly interrupted the event. Volunteers hurried children toward waiting buses. Emily remained behind helping collect decorations before the wind scattered them across the courtyard. A sudden gust lifted dozens of handmade paper butterflies into the air. Children laughed while chasing them. One butterfly landed near Adrian's polished shoes. He bent down, carefully picked it up. The folded paper carried tiny handwriting. Everyone deserves someone who believes in them. He looked toward Emily. She had written those words on every butterfly before giving them to the children. Not for recognition, simply as encouragement. Adrian quietly walked across the courtyard. Emily looked up in surprise as his shadow stopped beside her. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Rain continued falling around them. Finally, Adrian held out the paper butterfly. I believe this belongs to you. Emily accepted it carefully. Thank you. Another silence followed. Surprisingly, it wasn't uncomfortable. Adrian glanced toward the children boarding buses. They seemed happy. Emily watched them wave goodbye through rain-covered windows. They deserve happy memories. His gray eyes remained on her. You spend a great deal of time creating them. Emily shrugged gently. Children remember kindness much longer than adults realize. Adrian considered those words. You speak as though you've experienced that. Emily's smile became quieter. My grandmother raised me after my parents passed away. Her voice remained calm. Life wasn't always easy. I'm sorry. The words came naturally, almost unexpectedly. Emily met his eyes. So am I. She looked toward the departing buses. But sadness doesn't have to become someone's entire story. Those words settled deeply inside Adrian. Sadness doesn't have to become someone's entire story. He repeated the sentence silently, perhaps because it described his own life more accurately than he wished to admit. Marco discreetly approached. The car is ready. Adrian nodded. Before leaving, he looked back toward Emily. You never asked who I was. Emily smiled politely. I already knew. Most people become nervous. I was. He almost smiled. Almost. Emily looked down at the paper butterfly. My grandmother always says reputations tell one story. She looked back up. People tell another. For the first time in years, Adrian Moretti actually smiled. It was faint, almost impossible to notice. But it was real. Marco stared in complete disbelief. During 12 years beside Adrian, genuine smiles had become rarer than snowfall. Yet one quiet housekeeper had accomplished in minutes what no business victory, political alliance, or financial success had managed in years. That evening, Emily returned home carrying leftovers from the charity luncheon. Margaret looked delighted. You've been smiling all evening. Emily laughed softly. Have I? You certainly have. Emily hesitated. There was someone at the mansion today. Margaret raised an eyebrow. The famous businessman? Emily nodded. He isn't what people say. Margaret stirred her tea thoughtfully. The world enjoys creating monsters. Emily looked confused. And sometimes, Margaret continued, it also enjoys overlooking good people because they arrive wearing ordinary clothes. Emily quietly reflected on those words. She had spent years believing powerful people never noticed individuals like her. Now she wasn't so certain. Across the city, Adrian entered his private library. Instead of reviewing security reports, he found himself looking at the small paper butterfly resting on his desk. Marco appeared in the doorway. There is something else. What? The financial investigation into Blackwood Manor is complete. Adrian looked up. What did you find? Marco placed another folder on the desk. The mansion's owner has been diverting money intended for several charitable foundations. Adrian's expression hardened. Evidence. Enough. His gray eyes slowly moved back toward the colorful paper butterfly. One thought quietly formed. Emily had devoted herself to helping children at a charity event, completely unaware that someone else had been stealing from the very people she believed were being protected. Adrian closed the folder. Do nothing. Marco looked surprised. For now, the bodyguard understood immediately. Adrian was planning something. The question was, why did it suddenly matter so much? An unknown to both of them. The coming days would force Emily to choose between the peaceful life she had always known, and a dangerous truth powerful, enough to place her directly in the path of the city's darkest secrets. Emily Carter had never imagined that a simple conversation in the rain would leave such a lasting impression. Days passed, yet Adrian Moretti's quiet smile continued to return to her thoughts when she least expected it. Not because he was powerful, not because people feared him, but because, for a brief moment, the loneliness hidden behind his calm expression had seemed painfully familiar. She knew that look. It was the same expression she had seen on her grandmother after another unpaid bill arrived. The same look she had caught in her own reflection during nights when sleep refused to come. The loneliness of carrying every burden alone. Across the city, Adrian sat inside his private office reviewing the investigation into Blackwood Manor. The evidence was undeniable. Millions of dollars donated to children's charities had disappeared over several years. Luxury renovations, private accounts, false invoices. The mansion's owner had built an image of generosity while quietly stealing from those who needed help the most. Marco closed the folder. We can expose him today. Adrian remained silent. No. Marco frowned. You want more evidence? I want every child to receive every dollar that was stolen. So when this ends, Adrian said calmly, there will be nothing left for him to hide behind. Marco nodded. He understood. When Adrian moved against someone, he ensured they never recovered. Meanwhile, Emily's own struggles quietly grew heavier. Margaret's health had worsened. The cheerful old woman who always greeted each morning with a smile now struggled to climb the apartment stairs. One afternoon she collapsed while watering the tiny flowers outside their building. Emily rushed her to the hospital. Hours later, a doctor delivered difficult news. The medication is helping. He paused, but surgery would give her the best chance. Emily already knew what came next. The procedure is expensive. The doctor lowered his eyes. I'm afraid so. The number felt impossible, far beyond anything Emily could ever save. She thanked the doctor anyway, then quietly stepped into the hallway before allowing herself to cry. Not because she feared hard work. She had never been afraid of that. She cried because, for the first time, effort alone didn't seem enough. The following morning, she returned to work pretending everything was normal. No one noticed the exhaustion beneath her eyes. Except one person. Rachel gently touched her shoulder. You didn't sleep. Emily forced a smile. I'm all right. Rachel knew better. You don't have to carry everything yourself. Emily looked away. I don't even know where to begin. Neither of them realized someone nearby had overheard those words. Marco Rossi. He had arrived early to inspect security arrangements before Adrian's meeting with the mansion owner. Without interrupting, he quietly left. That evening he reported everything. Her grandmother needs surgery. Adrian looked up. How serious? Marco explained what little he had learned. Another silence filled the office. Finally, Adrian asked, did she ask anyone for help? No. Did she complain? No. Did she blame anyone? No. Marco hesitated before adding, she simply went back to work. Adrian leaned back in his chair. For years he had watched influential people beg for sympathy over inconveniences. Emily carried genuine hardship with remarkable dignity. It was becoming increasingly difficult to convince himself she was simply another stranger. Several days later, Blackwood Manor prepared for another exclusive gathering. Emily remained focused despite her worries. As she arranged flowers inside the grand library, the mansion owner entered unexpectedly. His expression was unusually pleasant. Emily. She turned. Yes, sir. I've noticed your dedication. Thank you. I have an opportunity for you. Emily listened quietly. One of tonight's guests is looking for a personal assistant. Something about his smile felt wrong. The salary is generous. Emily remained cautious. What would I need to do? Simply attend dinner. His answer arrived too quickly. No obligations. No pressure. Just conversation. Every instinct inside Emily warned her to refuse. I'm sorry. She spoke politely. I prefer remaining with the household staff. His pleasant smile disappeared. Think carefully. I have. Without another word, she returned to arranging flowers. The owner walked away visibly irritated. Unknown to Emily, the wealthy guest wasn't searching for an assistant. He was searching for someone easily manipulated into helping conceal years of financial crimes. Her refusal had unknowingly disrupted those plans. That evening, Adrian arrived for the scheduled meeting. The mansion owner greeted him enthusiastically. Business discussions quickly moved into the private study. For over an hour, Adrian calmly listened while the man described new investment opportunities. Not once did Adrian mention the investigation. Instead, he observed every nervous glance, every inconsistent answer, every attempt to redirect the conversation. Finally, Adrian stood. "I appreciate your hospitality." The owner smiled with obvious relief. "I look forward to working together." Adrian adjusted his cufflinks. "I wouldn't." The room fell silent. "What?" Adrian calmly placed a thick folder onto the desk. Inside were financial records, bank transfers, signed contracts, hidden accounts, years of carefully documented fraud. The owner's face drained of color. You stole from orphanages." Adrian's voice remained perfectly calm. "You stole from hospitals." Another page. "You stole from scholarship funds." Another. "And you expected me to become your business partner." The owner struggled to speak. "There has been a misunderstanding." "No," Adrian interrupted. "There hasn't." The silence became overwhelming. Then Adrian delivered the sentence that changed everything. "By tomorrow morning, every account you control will be frozen." "You can't." "I already have." The man staggered backward. "My lawyers are resigning. My investors, they've already been informed." Every escape disappeared before it could be spoken. Adrian walked toward the door. Without looking back, he added, "The money belongs to the children." Then he left. Emily knew nothing about that confrontation. She only noticed unusual activity the following morning. Police vehicles surrounded Blackwood Manor. Financial investigators entered carrying boxes. Employees gathered outside, whispering in confusion. Rachel found Emily near the entrance. "What happened?" Emily shook her head. "I don't know." Several hours later, the truth spread throughout the staff. Years of corruption had finally been exposed. Every stolen charitable donation would be recovered. Many employees celebrated. Others worried about losing their jobs. Emily felt both emotions at once. Then an unfamiliar black sedan stopped outside the mansion. Marco stepped out. He approached Emily respectfully. "Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you." Emily looked surprised. "With me? If you're willing." Her heart began beating faster. She followed him toward a quiet garden behind the estate. Adrian stood alone beside a fountain. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, he turned. "I hope you weren't harmed by today's events." Emily shook her head. "No, I'm relieved." She looked at him carefully. "Did you know?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Long enough." Emily slowly understood. "You were the one who exposed everything. I finished what others were afraid to begin." She looked toward the mansion. "So the money will reach the people it was meant for." Emily smiled. Not because of his influence, because children she had met only days earlier would finally receive the help they deserved. "You've made a lot of people happy." Adrian gave a faint smile. "That wasn't always something people said about me." Emily met his eyes. Maybe they never knew the whole story. For the second time since meeting her, Adrian found himself speechless. Because no one had ever judged him by his actions toward the vulnerable. They judged only the legend. Emily saw the man. And for the first time in many years, Adrian wondered whether those were two different people after all. As the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, neither of them realized someone was watching from the shadows. One surviving partner in the corruption scheme had escaped arrest. He blamed Adrian for destroying everything. But when he saw the quiet young woman standing beside the city's most powerful man, he made a decision born from revenge. If Adrian Moretti had discovered one person he truly wanted to protect, then that person would become the easiest way to hurt him. Neither Adrian nor Emily noticed the black SUV slowly disappearing through the mansion gates. The greatest danger either of them had ever faced had just begun. The first sign that something had changed was almost impossible to notice. Emily Carter began seeing the same black SUV more often than seemed natural. It appeared across the street from her apartment one evening, outside the neighborhood grocery store 2 days later, parked near the bus stop the following morning. Each time she looked again, it was gone. She convinced herself it was only a coincidence. After everything that had happened at Blackwood Manor, perhaps she was simply imagining things. She had no idea someone inside that vehicle had been studying her daily routine. Across the city, Adrian Moretti was quietly rebuilding the charitable foundation, whose funds had been stolen. Every dollar recovered from the Investigation was being redirected to children's hospitals, orphanages, and scholarship programs. No press conference announced it. No interviews followed. The donations were made anonymously. Marco looked over the financial reports. You could let everyone know you were responsible. Adrian closed the folder. Why? It would improve your reputation. Adrian gave a small shake of his head. If the children receive what they need, my reputation is irrelevant. Marco couldn't help but think of Emily. Only weeks earlier, Adrian would never have spoken those words. Something inside him had changed. Or perhaps, someone had reminded him of the man he had buried beneath years of violence and responsibility. Emily, meanwhile, found herself unexpectedly unemployed. With Blackwood Manor closed indefinitely, every employee received a final paycheck and sincere apologies from the court-appointed administrator. Rachel hugged her tightly before leaving. You'll find something. Emily smiled, though uncertainty filled her heart. I hope so. The final paycheck barely covered 1 month's rent. Margaret's surgery was still impossible to afford. Every job application seemed to end the same way. We'll call you. Nobody ever did. Still, Emily refused to give up. Each morning, she ironed the same modest blouse. Each morning, she walked across the city carrying copies of her resume. Each evening, she returned, home with polite rejections and another reassuring smile for her grandmother. Margaret noticed everything. You don't have to pretend to be strong all the time. Emily gently squeezed the old woman's hand. I'm not pretending. You must be tired. I am. Then why do you keep smiling? Emily looked toward the small window where the evening sunlight painted the room gold. Because if hope disappears, she smiled softly, everything else disappears with it. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. My beautiful girl. Several days later, an elegant envelope arrived at the apartment. Emily opened it carefully. Inside was an invitation. She had been offered a position managing community outreach for a newly established charitable foundation. The salary was more than double what she had earned before. Health insurance, paid leave, benefits she had never imagined having. The only thing missing was the name of the person responsible for the offer. Emily read the letter 3 times. Something about it felt almost unreal. The foundation occupied an impressive historic building that had recently been restored. Bright offices overlooked a peaceful public garden. Children played outside while volunteers prepared weekend activities. The atmosphere felt completely different from Blackwood Manor. Warm, hopeful, purposeful. During the interview, the director smiled warmly. We've heard remarkable things about you. Emily blinked. You have. The staff from Blackwood Manor spoke very highly of your character. Emily felt embarrassed. I only tried to do my job. The director laughed softly. Exactly. She extended a contract. The position is yours if you'd like it. Emily accepted with grateful hands. Walking out of the building, she couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in months, the future felt possible again. She still didn't know that Adrian Moretti had quietly purchased the foundation months earlier through one of his companies and instructed its directors to hire people known for genuine compassion rather than impressive resumes. He never asked them to hire Emily. He simply made sure she received a fair opportunity. The rest, she earned herself. Weeks passed. Emily transformed the foundation into something extraordinary. She organized book drives, food collections, scholarship programs, neighborhood festivals. She remembered every child's name, every volunteer's birthday, every elderly donor who simply wanted someone to talk to. The foundation grew faster than anyone expected. People didn't come because of advertising. They came because kindness was contagious. And Emily carried enough kindness to change an entire community. News of the foundation's success eventually reached Adrian. He visited quietly one afternoon without informing anyone. From a second-floor balcony, he watched Emily kneeling beside a young boy struggling to read. Patiently, encouragingly, without once looking at the clock. You were right. Marco stood beside him. About what? She changes every place she enters. Adrian smiled faintly. No. He answered quietly. She reminds people they can change themselves. But darkness had not disappeared. It had only been waiting. Victor Salazar, the only financier who had escaped the investigation, had spent weeks rebuilding his criminal network. Everything he had lost, he blamed on Adrian. And everything Adrian seemed to value, Victor intended to destroy. One rainy evening, Emily stayed late organizing donations. Most volunteers had already gone home. The building was unusually quiet. She carried several boxes toward the storage room when the lights suddenly went out. Silence. Then footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Emily froze. Who's there? No answer. Only another step. Then another. Her heartbeat quickened. The emergency lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the hallway. 3 men emerged from the darkness. One smiled coldly. Miss Carter. Fear swept through her. What do you want? The same thing everyone wants. He stepped closer. Mr. Moretti's attention. Before Emily could react, one of the men grabbed her arm. A scream echoed through the empty building. Miles away, Adrian's phone rang. Marco answered first. His expression changed instantly. Boss. What happened? It's Emily. Adrian stood immediately. What about her? They've taken her. For one brief moment, the room became completely silent. Not because Adrian didn't know what to do. Because he did. His calm expression disappeared. His gray eyes hardened into something Marco had not seen for years. Find them. Within seconds, every available member of Adrian's security organization mobilized across the city. Roadblocks, surveillance, helicopters. Information flowed faster than police networks could manage. Victor Salazar had underestimated one thing. Adrian Moretti would negotiate over money. He would negotiate over territory. He would negotiate over business. But he would never negotiate over an innocent life. Emily was taken to an abandoned warehouse near the waterfront. Her hands were tied, but her spirit remained unbroken. Victor entered slowly. So, he smiled. The famous Emily Carter. She stared back without speaking. I expected someone different. Emily remained calm. If you're trying to frighten me. Victor laughed. You already know why you're here. She shook her head. No. It's because Adrian Moretti cares. Emily's expression softened. I don't think you know him. Victor smiled again. I know enough. Emily quietly answered. No. You only know the stories. Victor's smile slowly faded. Even now? Even frightened? She refused to hate. She refused to become bitter. It irritated him more than anger ever could. Outside, black vehicles silently surrounded the warehouse. Marco studied the building. 23 armed men. Adrian checked his watch. Emily is inside. Marco nodded. We're ready. Adrian looked toward the dark warehouse. His voice remained calm. Bring everyone home. Moments later, the lights inside the building suddenly failed. Confusion erupted. Doors burst open. Within minutes, Adrian's security team overwhelmed Victor's men with remarkable precision. Emily heard shouting, running footsteps. Then, silence. The warehouse door slowly opened. Adrian stepped inside. For several seconds, neither moved. He looked at her. She looked at him. Relief quietly replaced fear. Adrian untied the ropes himself. Are you hurt? Emily gently shook her head. No. She noticed the concern in his eyes. Real concern. Not obligation. Not responsibility. Something much deeper. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. I'm all right. Those two simple words released a weight. Adrian hadn't realized he had been carrying since the phone call. Police sirens echoed in the distance. Victor Salazar was arrested trying to escape through the rear exit. His organization collapsed before sunrise. The danger was finally over. Several weeks later, Margaret successfully underwent surgery. When Emily attempted to pay the hospital, the receptionist smiled. The balance has already been cleared. Emily looked confused. By whom? I'm sorry. The receptionist smiled apologetically. The donor wished to remain anonymous. Emily suspected the answer immediately. That evening she visited Adrian. He stood alone in the foundation's garden watching. Children play beneath the setting sun. You paid for her surgery. Adrian looked away. I made sure she received treatment. You didn't have to. I know. Emily smiled. Thank you. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Your grandmother once gave you hope. He looked toward the laughing children. You've spent your life giving hope to strangers. His voice softened. I simply returned a small part of what you've already given this city. Emily's eyes shimmered with emotion. She realized then that the man the world feared possessed one of the gentlest hearts she had ever known. And Adrian realized something equally important. Power had earned him respect. Wealth had earned him influence. Fear had earned him obedience. But one ordinary young woman had earned something no one else ever had. His complete trust. The future that awaited them would no longer be built on fear, but on the quiet strength of two people who had changed each other forever. Yet one final chapter remained. Because the greatest transformation had only just begun, winter slowly gave way to spring. For the first time in many years, the city seemed different. Not because its skyline had changed, not because new buildings had appeared, but because hundreds of children now carried books instead of empty backpacks. Community centers once threatened with closure welcomed families every day. Scholarship programs reopened. Neighborhood gardens bloomed again. No newspaper could fully explain why so many lives had suddenly begun, moving in a better direction. Most people assumed generous donors had stepped forward. Few knew that everything began with one young woman who had never stopped believing. Kindness mattered. Emily Carter never asked to become an inspiration. She simply continued living the way she always had. Each morning she arrived at the foundation before anyone else. She greeted volunteers by name. She listened to children describe their dreams. She comforted parents overwhelmed by impossible choices. Whenever someone thanked her, she always smiled and replied with the same quiet words. "We're helping each other." That simple sentence slowly became the heart of the foundation. It was printed on brochures, painted across a mural in the children's activity room, repeated by volunteers until it became more than a slogan. It became a promise. Meanwhile, Adrian Moretti found himself making decisions that would have seemed impossible only months earlier. Several businesses connected to his organization were sold. Profits from legitimate investments were redirected toward housing programs, medical clinics, and educational projects. Some of his closest associates questioned the sudden change. Others worried that compassion would be mistaken for weakness. One evening, Marco joined Adrian on the balcony of his office. The city lights stretched endlessly beneath them. "You've changed," Marco said. Adrian smiled faintly. "No." He rested his hands on the balcony railing. "I remembered who I wanted to become before the world convinced me I couldn't." Marco followed his gaze toward the glowing streets below. "And she reminded you?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. Silence said enough. Weeks later, the foundation hosted its first annual community celebration. Unlike the extravagant galas Emily had once worked behind the scenes, this gathering was open to everyone. Children performed music they had spent months practicing. Local artists displayed paintings. Families shared homemade meals. Neighbors who had never spoken before laughed, together beneath strings of warm lights. No one asked how much anyone earned. No one cared what neighborhood they came from. For one beautiful evening, everyone simply belonged. Emily walked through the celebration greeting volunteers when she noticed Adrian standing quietly near the edge of the garden. As always, he seemed more comfortable watching others enjoy the moment than becoming the center of attention. She walked toward him. "You've been hiding all evening." A small smile appeared. "I've been observing." "And what have you discovered?" Adrian looked across the festival. A little boy proudly showed his new bicycle to another child. An elderly couple danced slowly beside the musicians. Margaret laughed with several volunteers while handing out homemade cookies. Finally, Adrian answered, "I've spent years believing power was measured by control." He looked at Emily. "It isn't." She tilted her head. "What is it?" "It's creating a future where people no longer need to be afraid." Emily's eyes softened. "You already started doing that." He gave a quiet laugh. "No, I started because of you." For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of laughter and music drifted through the evening air. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming roses across the garden. Adrian reached into his jacket. Emily looked surprised as he removed a small, carefully protected paper butterfly. Its colors had faded slightly with time. She recognized it immediately. The butterfly she had folded months earlier during the children's charity event. "You kept it." "I couldn't throw it away." He carefully unfolded the delicate paper. Inside were the words she had written long ago. "Everyone deserves someone who believes in them." Adrian looked into her eyes. "When I first read those words, they felt like something meant for the children." He paused. "I didn't realize they were meant for me too." Emily felt tears forming. Not tears of sadness, but of relief. Relief that someone who had carried so much loneliness had finally allowed another person into his heart. She stepped closer. "I never wanted to change your life." "I know. You changed it yourself." Adrian smiled. "Perhaps." He gently folded the butterfly once more. "But you showed me it was still possible." Without another word, He reached for her hand. This time, Emily didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as though they had always belonged together. The crowd continued celebrating around them, unaware that the quiet moment, unfolding beneath the garden lights, meant more than any grand declaration ever could. There was no dramatic speech, no expensive gift, no audience applauding. Only two people who had found in each other something neither had expected: peace. Months turned into years. Margaret recovered her strength and often joked that retirement had become far busier than working ever had. Rachel joined the foundation as its volunteer coordinator. The frightened waiter whose job Emily had once defended eventually became the director of a youth mentoring program. The little girl with the stuffed rabbit grew into a confident student who dreamed of becoming a teacher. Even the paper butterflies continued to appear at every community event. Each child decorated one before taking it home. Each butterfly carried a handwritten message of hope. Emily insisted that no two messages should ever be exactly alike, because every person deserved encouragement written just for them. As for Adrian, the stories surrounding his name slowly began to change. People still respected him. Some still feared the legend. But those who truly knew him spoke of something else. A man who quietly funded hospitals. A man who rebuilt neighborhoods without asking for recognition. A man who discovered that protecting people required more courage than controlling them. Whenever journalists attempted to credit him for the city's remarkable transformation, he always redirected the praise elsewhere. There are countless ordinary people making extraordinary differences. Every day, he would say, they simply don't receive headlines. One sunny afternoon, nearly 3 years after that rainy evening when everything began, Emily stood outside the foundation watching children chase dozens of colorful paper butterflies through the park. Margaret stood beside her with a warm smile. You were right. Emily looked over. About what? The person who would notice your heart. Emily laughed softly. I remember telling you nobody ever would. Margaret gently squeezed her hand. The wonderful thing about life. She smiled toward Adrian, who was laughing with a group of children across the lawn, is that it often waits until hope is almost gone before sending something beautiful. Emily watched him for a long moment. She thought about the frightened young woman who had once believed she would spend her entire life unnoticed. She remembered the tiny apartment, the endless bus rides, the long days spent cleaning rooms where no one knew her name. She remembered the rain, the paper butterfly, the unexpected conversations, the impossible journey that followed. Everything had changed, not because a powerful man rescued an ordinary girl, but because an ordinary girl reminded a powerful man that kindness is the greatest strength anyone can possess. And together, they proved that love is not built on fear. It is built on choosing one another day after day, through every storm, every hardship, and every new beginning. So the next time the world tells someone that kindness is weakness, remember Emily Carter, the girl everyone ignored, because in the end, she didn't become unforgettable because of the man who loved her. She became unforgettable because she never stopped loving a world that had almost forgotten how. And perhaps that is the greatest love story of all. The end.